Thanks for joining us. We're live in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. African leaders are in Washington, D.C. tonight for a major summit hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden. More than 40 heads of government or state, as well as African Union officials and business people, are attending the three-day gathering. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told a meeting of African entrepreneurs that the summit's aim is to develop a partnership, democracy, and trade. And the U.S. is engaged in a struggle for influence in the continent with China, Russia, and others. And ahead of the summit, the chairman of the African Union, Senegalese President Macky Sall, said for too long he and his colleagues had not been properly listened to.
It is fitting that we are meeting here at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, a national treasure. On its top floor, and I don't know if you've had the opportunity to visit, but on the top floor of the museum, there's an exhibit called Cultural Expressions. It explores in part the contributions of the African diaspora and how its members have shaped American culture and life through fashion, the arts, dance, language, food, music. As this museum shows, the United States continues to be enriched immeasurably by the African diaspora, from the piercing comedy of Trevor Noah, who we will miss on The Daily Show, to the Olte of Thames, who I happen to have on my phone, to the speed skating of Mama Bine, who I don't have on my phone, among so many others.
Okay, and for more on this, we can now cross live to Washington with the Arise correspondent Adesua Omara, who, I've just been told that it's Nnanna. Yes, Arise News definitely has two correspondents there. Nkechi, good evening and very warm welcome to Newsnight. Tell us, the summit is already underway and over 40 African heads of state and of course the U.S. president and other entrepreneurs are upbeat about the ingredients for this summit. Tell us more.
Yes, Christian, definitely. African nations, their leaders, business people, young African diaspora people are really excited about this summit. One of the points is because of the body language and the vibe that the U.S. is giving the summit, the importance of that equal partnership, moving away from that donor and recipient relationship that wealthy powers or international institutions usually have with the African nations. But earlier today, the summit began with the Africa Young Leaders Forum. And the importance of that forum really stems from the fact that it was the first event to kick off the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. And as you heard U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken say there, the African diaspora is definitely important to the United States as they continue to be enriched immensely by the African diaspora. And out of that pool, you have the Nigerian diaspora, which is the most successful diaspora in the United States in terms of income levels and also education. And what's important and the implication of empowering African young diaspora is that most times they end up going back to the country that they're connected with and in turn enriching other people in that country. And the importance of that is when you empower and partner with this African diaspora and they go back to their countries and empower other people, it trickles down to the masses. And that sort of shows us the importance of focusing in the African diaspora. The U.S. Secretary of State also sort of highlighted some of the programs that the U.S. has embarked on to really enrich that partnership and to show their commitment to the African diaspora. One of that is the Young Africa Leadership Initiative, which under that you have the Academy for Women Entrepreneurs, which was established in 2019. And now that program has empowered over 5,400 women across the African continent, really to help them network and achieve a scale of their small businesses. And Christian, really the importance of this is it's not just all about shop talk. We need to see the evidence of these partnerships. We need to see that Tunde in Lagos, who has a startup focusing on the health system in Nigeria, is really reducing the risk of debt in the country. We need to see that Mama BC, who is in Port Harcourt, is scaling up her small business and in turn sending her children to school. And that's the importance of focusing on these young African leaders and also the partnership with the young African diaspora. Christian.
So Pablo puts there, Nkechi, and already in the kitty, the United States has pledged $55 billion to Africa and the attending head of states, and princely too, Ghana is going to rake in some $3 billion IMF bailout funds to help stimulate its economy. What's in here for the giant of Africa, Nigeria?
Well, Nigeria stands to benefit a lot from the summit if they position themselves properly. Between now and the next 1 hour to 30 minutes, President Buhari is going to be speaking on climate adaptation and the just energy transition. And remember, at the COP27 in Egypt, when he was represented by the Minister of Environment, he really spoke about Nigeria not being able to access, or as Nigeria doesn't have fund to urgently finance its climate adaptation and just energy transition because of the debt distress of the country. And so Nigeria really stands to gain a lot from this summit. However, it's where the African government, like you mentioned in the introduction, the AU chair has been speaking about how African governments have not been properly heard, and they're really stressing the fact that they're not here for handouts, they're not here for aid, they're really here for innovation, for mutual benefits, for shared priorities. And so that's what the Giant of Africa really stands to gain at this US-Africa Leaders Summit, Christian.
Very well situated there. But another troubling issue for the continent, it's debt hang-on or hangover, if you may call it. Will the heads of state from Africa be asking America to intervene for them for some sort of debt forgiveness, Nkechi?
We can't report on that yet, Christian. We're waiting to hear what President Buhari will say in his speech. However, like I said earlier, I don't think African governments or the African private sector that's here is here to really ask for handouts. And again, African nation is now, the African continent is now seen as sort of a rising geopolitical rising star that the US wants to be aligned with. And so we actually need to be sort of thinking big and thinking outside the box in this trajectory that's been projected for Africa as a star power that everyone is sort of scrambling to. And so we need to be sort of picky with the requests and sort of assistance that we need. It needs to be mutually beneficial. And so sort of asking for debt relief, experts and critics, or debt forgiveness, like you put it, experts and critics have been really coining it in such a way that African nations should not mortgage themselves out and so not to lose their independence, Christian.
All right, Nkechi, let's look at the issue of environment and the fallout of COP27. Africa seems to, be one of the worst hit in this situation, not benefiting so much from it with its abundant natural and human resources. Will the issue of environment, be on the top burner at this Africa-US summit? And what do you think is the disposition of the United States to the environmental or the ecosystem, in Africa, how to sustain and preserve it instead of plundering it, as was seen in certain parts of the African continent? Nkechi?
Yes, definitely, Christian. Nigeria had just had the worst floods in a decade that killed over 600 people and displaced millions and millions of people and plunged the country into more food insecurity. And so, yes, like I said earlier, today, day one of the summit, right now, actually, there's an ongoing forum focusing on climate adaptation, climate change, a just energy transition, where President Buhari is expected to speak. And yes, the United States is taking this seriously. And as you know, we've always reiterated this position that Africa really suffers the most backlash of climate change, of the problems of climate change, and we sort of input the less footprint on climate change. And so yes, the United States is really taking this seriously, and at that forum right now there's a lot of robust discussion on how the Nigerian and also other African nations and the United States will partner in really stemming the consequences of climate change. Christian.
Thank you so very much, Nnanna, there for all the summation about the Africa-US Summit and President Muhammadu Buhari's visit. And during the course of the bulletin, Nigeria's president would be speaking, and I'm sure Adesua Omorua, who is on the presidential entourage, would be speaking to us live from Washington, D.C.